The ship has reached the shore.
After marathon negotiations, the United Nations announcing a historic agreement to protect the world's oceans. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Cadlips, filling in for Anand Naidu, and you're watching The Heat. Welcome, everyone. It is called the UN High Seas Treaty and establishes protections for international waters. That's the area beyond national jurisdictions, which makes up 2/3 of the Earth's ocean surface. 193 nations agreeing to collaborate on threats to the high seas, including biodiversity loss, pollution, and climate change. Environmental groups are hopeful this treaty will address an important gap in marine conservation.
Before, we didn't really have a clear pathway of protecting these areas, these international waters, at least not in a sort of fully marine protected area or marine reserve. But now that's what this new treaty does, is it gives us that opportunity. It gives us the legal framework that we can use to establish protected areas in the high seas.
And for more on the UN High Seas Treaty, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Texas is Peter Lee. He is an associate professor of East Asian politics, animal policy, and law in China at the University of Houston. Also with us in Phoenix, Mahmoud. He is the director of the Climate and Water Program at the Middle East Institute. From London, Julian Jackson is a senior officer with the Pew Charitable Trust. He is leading Europe's campaign to protect oceans life on the high seas. And Minna Epps is the head of IUCN Ocean, Center for Conservation Action, and she is joining us from Geneva. Thank you all for taking time to chat. Min, I want to get right to you. This international treaty took 20 years. That's an awful long time. Firstly, why did it take that long? And many are calling this perhaps a second chance for the oceans. What do they mean by that? And how will this treaty be enforced?
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here with you. Yes, indeed, it has taken a very long time. And I think it was as early in 1995 when actually it was put forward that perhaps we needed a treaty to actually for preservation of biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And I think that it has taken a long time, and it's because it's multilateralism. It's not straightforward. It actually does take a long time to get 193 states to come together to agree on a treaty on the high seas. And I think it's of very much importance because this is an area beyond national jurisdiction. It's not have been completely lawless. It has been, there are several different mechanisms and legal frameworks protecting the high seas, or regulating, I should say, but it is with several different loopholes and gaps. So this is really an effort to bring together a holistic management of the ocean and close some of those legal gaps in order for us to protect the ocean.
Now, Julian, you've been quite vested in this. I think that's a fair understatement, working so long in the negotiations. As one of your colleagues in the Pew Trust said, this is, quote, a huge deal. I'd like to get your reaction, and what are you encouraged about most?
I think I'm encouraged mainly. I mean, it was an amazing moment there when you played back the clip from the closing plenary session from Rena's bringing the ship home comment, and that's been played a couple of times, and every time it brings a kind of tear to my eye. And I think that moment was, as Mina just indicated, this is multilateralism in action. But what it means for the ocean and the planet is a number of things. And I think from our perspective, that ability to put in place highly protected marine areas to really give the ocean some resilience, the ability to adapt to climate change, the ability to adapt from all the pressures that are currently the ocean is currently under. So many man-made pressures at the moment, be that overfishing, plastic pollution, the acidification, the oxygenation of the ocean, and so on. So putting in place those protected areas is a key part of it. But there's a number of other parts of the treaty package that are really important as well. So the treaty also provides for greater emphasis on environmental impact assessments for new activities on the high seas. And then importantly, this is a global treaty, so that there's something in it for everybody, whether or not you are a coastal state, or no matter how developed or developing the state is. There's also the ability for capacity building and technology transfer, marine technology transfer, so that we're going to have a stake in it for everybody. That also means that we've got a mechanism for sharing benefits from the exploitation of genetic resources. So there's lots in there for everybody, and that gives me hope that this is going to be a treaty that the whole world can get behind.
You know, Julian, I want to follow up real quickly. It's great to see you so excited about this, and I don't want to put any kind of damper on it, but are you concerned about compliance and monitoring? Because as we see these wonderful pictures of the ocean while you're talking, I spent some time doing a story on a coral reef area about a year ago, and at that time I learned how important that reef was to knocking down storm surge during more violent hurricanes that we're seeing in light of climate change, and also the fact that just a small tick upward in temperature can have a devastating effect on coral reefs all over the world. I was unaware of that. So how important is this going to be to the biodiversity, to the life within the sea?
It's going to be crucial. We've got one ocean, but to your first question about enforcement, I think there's a number of mechanisms that's foreseen and that's important here. You know, 200 nautical miles is quite a long way offshore, so we're going to rely upon this is an international treaty, so states themselves will be responsible for enforcing their flagged vessels, but also within their jurisdiction. So perhaps where there might be some sort of beneficial ownership or something, there could be a way that states could make sure that the obligations are fulfilled there. It's also going to have to rely perhaps on monitoring, and there's a number of technological ways that we can now monitor what's happening beyond the horizon. So with satellite monitoring, with ship sensors, AIS in particular. So those are a couple of ways in which we can enforce this.
You know, Mohammed, one of the biggest threats, to pick up on what we're talking about, is overfishing, and just reading about the number of species that are becoming threatened, that are becoming endangered, especially the shark population. Something like 1/3 of all the sharks in the ocean now threatened. Is this going to have a significant benefit for preserving this very important biodiversity we have in our oceans?
Yeah. I think that is one of the intended purposes of this treaty. I mean, it hits multiple areas I think my fellow panelists have hit on already. But the overfishing component, one thing we need to recognize is marine life is not static. And certainly the treaty is targeting this resource in terms of not having it overexploited. And what I mean by that is, once you go out to international waters, there is no restriction on fishing, right? So it's unregulated, marine life is unprotected. But that also has direct consequences to nations that are just adjacent to where that may happen in terms of their national waters. So that could then, in effect, alter the local sort of fishing capability of those nations that necessarily, that actually depend on fishing as part of their economy. So targeting overfishing through this in international waters should have a benefit in terms of fishing populations or fish populations and fishing capacity for countries within their national jurisdiction. So as a way to temper what's happening in the international seas, and then also altering, hopefully beneficially, the fishing component or fishing economy of countries that rely on that within their national waters.
You know, Peter Lee, I've been watching you nodding your head in agreement to a lot of what our panelists have said. And you have to think about what happened in the United States from 2016 to 2020 in terms of the former president, who really didn't have a whole lot of time for discussing any kind of environmental controls. But if you think about what has happened over the years, first we have the Paris Accord coming out, trying to limit, of course, the temperature of the Earth going up any, but also COP 15 that came out just, I believe last year in Montreal, countries pledging 30 by 30, protecting 30% of the planet's land and seas by the year 2030. Researchers have projected that there are millions of plants and animals at risk. What is this treaty going to do to that? And what is China doing to protect all the vast coastline it has in that area beyond the 200 miles into international waters?
That's a great question. We know that China has been in the center of international attention. China is one of the world's hotspots of global biodiversity with a large number of terrestrial and marine species. In the last 2 decades, we have seen a rise in awareness on the side of the Chinese government of the importance of a national plan to protect and restore marine ecosystem. The effort is actually part of the government's national development plan, which is the 14 5-year plan. I'll just give you one example. In a joint statement issued by 6 national government ministries last year, the Chinese government identified 5 major tasks for fighting ocean pollution and stopping the erosion of the coastal ecosystem. Importantly, 4 supporting measures were proposed. This include building a comprehensive legal framework, use of science and technology to enhance protection and restoration capacity, joining and participating in international efforts, and finally, strengthening government leadership and the supervision of the overall efforts.
You know, it's interesting if you think that the United States and China have been at such loggerheads for such a long time, but one thing these 2 nations can agree on at this point is climate change, and the United States now has a climate envoy. I want you all to listen to what climate envoy John Kerry had to say about the need for acting and acting quickly.
The mission now is to get more serious, to come together, to double down, to pick up the pace, to implement real projects and deploy real money, which enables us to further enhance global ambition, hold everyone accountable, and build the security for the future that our citizens demand and have a right to.
Now, that was Kerry speaking at Our Oceans 2023, a conference in Panama City. Minna, I want you to react to that. How important is this? It's wonderful to have all these proclamations, all these promises we're going to do something, but to what degree do you think people are kind of tired about hearing promises and want to see action?
Absolutely. I mean, in all respects, I mean, we need this good rhetoric, but we'd also need real action. And I would say that I think in general, the importance of the ocean, both in terms of climate change mitigation and adaptation, has really kind of increased both on the political, but also on the public agenda. So the politicians are feeling that public pressure in terms of we need to protect our ocean. And it actually has increased a lot of attention. Last year was actually labeled the Year of the Ocean. There were multiple international conferences. There was the United Nations Ocean Conferences, all making pledges to protect the ocean. And what we really need to see as, because we know we're facing a climate crisis, but also biodiversity crisis. And the ocean provides that kind of nexus in order to basically protect biodiversity, basically integrate biodiversity protection and climate change action. The ocean is so important to us. I mean, we know, for example, that it provides tremendous resources and benefits to humankind and different kinds of services. But for example, some services, we don't want the ocean to continue. For example, that the CO2 that's absorbed, the excessive CO2 that's absorbed by the ocean is making it more acidic. So in its essence, the ocean is becoming more acidic, deoxygenated and warmer. And this all have major implications on biodiversity and its productivity. So for the ecosystems. So I think it's great to have it on the top of the political agenda, but we do really need to see real action. But I do think that this latest treaty is really a sign of hope, because it's something that's been out of sight, out of mind, and is actually now on the forefront. And it's really good news in order for us to protect the ocean, to be able to establish marine protected areas, which will help protect biodiversity and fight climate change at the same time.
Yeah, and Minna, to pick up on what you're talking about, the oceans absorb 90% of the excess heat around the world. So it's extremely significant there. In terms of the acidic damage, it's damaging all the shellfish, making them so brittle moving forward. And obviously people are concerned if we can't find a way to mitigate this, obviously there's going to be a huge problem. And Julian, the European Union pledging $860 million at the conference for research, for monitoring and conservation. I want to say that is so important when you think about those giant trawlers, processing plants, if you will, that just kind of patrol in those areas that can do such damage, just, overfishing areas so rapidly. What is this latest action going to do, and how significant is the fact that the European Union is now coughing up that kind of money?
I have to confess, I wasn't aware of that particular pledge, but when it comes to the BBNJ treaty, the EU recently pledged, or during the meeting they pledged, 40 million euro towards the implementation and ratification. So this is money immediately after we've actually adopted this treaty. We've adopted it in principle so far. It needs to still go through a legal scrub at the UN and then be properly adopted. In the next couple of months, we hope that will be done pretty quickly. So they've put forward this package of 40 million to help countries actually be able to ratify. So that's bringing it into force as soon as possible. That's really helpful. And then what the EU have also done is spearheaded a sort of high ambition coalition for the ocean that they've called it. And this was really to get the political pressure on these negotiations to get this treaty over the line. And I think we saw that in the room, the fact that 36 hours after negotiations had had run in that final session, the room was still full. The fact that negotiators made lots of compromises, the fact that everybody that kind of willed this treaty into existence, I would like to think that this is going to persist into the next phases as well, to get it ratified and actually to get it entered into force and then start making the difference on the water.
And Mohammed, I want to talk to you about the other efforts in terms of environmental sensitivity, in terms of tackling climate change. Lithium batteries are a problem. Right now it's difficult to manufacture these in an environmentally sensitive way, and one problem is mining the ocean floor to come up with the material needed for this transition. While mining may solve the energy crisis for some country, what is the ongoing threat to this, and is this addressed at all in this latest treaty?
I think in a way it is addressed. I mean, one of the areas that the treaty is trying to limit in these open international waters is natural resource extraction. And it creates, absent this treaty, it sort of perpetuates imbalance between certain countries. Certainly countries that have access to be able to begin exploration and deep sea mining to extract these natural resources have the advantage to do so. But certainly same as the case with the overfishing, affecting some of these poor nations that rely on aquaculture as a source of economy and potentially these deep sea resources. This helps to sort of level the playing field in a sense, while also trying to regulate and in a sense conserve or limit these activities that could pressure these deep sea resources. So certainly it creates hopefully a level playing field in terms of limiting these types of activities, but also agreement amongst countries so that the poorer, more developing countries aren't left behind that may have had access to these resources that are just outside of their own national water boundaries.
Yeah, that certainly has been the rub, so to speak. And a member of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, which you represent, has called for a moratorium on this kind of mining. What are your thoughts?
Yes, I think if you just go back to think about the importance of the ocean and what we know and what we do not know, and it's basically the ocean, and certainly the deep ocean is one of the least explored parts of our planet. But we do know that the sediment of the ocean floor plays a tremendous important part of the carbon sequestration and storage of carbon. So it's one of the world's largest storage of carbon. So do we really want to tamper with this? In the sense that we are looking for a clean transition to move into exploiting the ocean for minerals, that so we can actually justify our clean transition, but at what cost? So if you just look at the immediate impact on the sediment and on the ocean floor, that will not only have a disturbance of the community, the benthic community, but also it might create plumes, it has noise pollution, visual imperative for species who are dependent on that to locate their partners and their mates in order to thrive. So it has a multiple dimension implications on biodiversity, but also other. For example, it could have an impact on the fisheries and the mesopelagic. And there's a lot of things that we do not know yet about the ocean and what are the potential implications. So it all means we need to impose a precautionary principle. And IUCN is an international intergovernmental organization comprised of member states, of 200 member state agencies, but also civil society and indigenous peoples communities who have actually voted and come together and call for a moratorium until we have more information. We also need to be able to make sure that any of these interaction or intervention actually doesn't create a negative impact on the environment as a whole. So for that, you need environmental regulations, standards, and guidelines, which currently do not exist.
You know, Peter, dramatic measures can lead to dramatic results. And I'm thinking specifically about the Yangtze River in China, the longest waterway that is called the Mother River there. In January of 2021, the government imposed a 10-year fishing ban. What kind of progress have people seen along that major waterway? And does that give you hope that that kind of severe measure can work in other areas?
Yes, I would say there is a lot we don't know about the deep sea ecological system, but we know a lot of damage to the ecological system on the Yangtze River. However, I want to say this, fishing ban on the Yangtze River is one of the most commendable actions taken by the Chinese government. Regrettably, this act has, barely known outside audience. Critics may say that the act is, while the act is commendable, but the damage has been done. I agree. Things could have been different if actions have been taken early. But the fishing ban is commendable because it takes great political courage for the Chinese government to take action on it. Since the start of the fishing ban in January 2020, more than 100,000 fishing boats have been demolished, and more than 230,000 fishermen were moved to different livelihoods or have been retired. But I want to point out one more thing. So China's fishing ban does not limit to the Yangtze River. In other sections of the other rivers of the country also exercise, fishing ban. And also importantly, sections of the coastal areas, Chinese provincial governments impose a fishing ban during different periods of time. And also one thing, commendable is that China also implemented a self-imposed fishing ban on the high seas in the last several years, such as in Pacific Ocean, the Indian Ocean, and of course the Atlantic. So they realized that fishing, has to be limited, has to be regulated.
Peter, China has what now, a middle class of 400, 500 million people who want to live in an environmentally safe life at this point, and they are making demands as well. Are you seeing that? Is the Chinese government doubling down again, saying that they are really going to make climate change, pollution, one of the key measures moving forward? What do you think the priorities need to be in China in terms of the waterways?
The United Nations World Ocean Assessment issued in 2021 confirmed once again the many dangers to the ocean that all countries must respond with actions. In the Chinese case, 80% of the pollution to the coastal waters come from 3 land sources: industrial waste, household garbage, and animal agriculture. So tackling these land-based pollutants and stopping them from going into the sea should be an important area of the Chinese government for Chinese governments to focus on. Now, besides, efforts should also be made to prevent pollution from, for example, oil drilling, from ship discharges, accidents, such as oil spills and other disasters like algal blooms, the result of over-fertilization or contamination from aquatic farming operations.
Right.
Of course, continuing the self-imposed fishing ban on the high seas and the ratification of the High Seas Treaty by China are certainly an integral part of the Chinese actions.
You know, I look at the clock and I think, where's the time go? Julian, I wanted to bring this up earlier, but let's talk about the plastic pollution, because I think we've all seen those images of these massive plastic islands that are kind of brought together by currents, and also sea turtles, the darlings of the ocean, you know, trapped with the rings from the six-packs around their necks. I know this doesn't specifically target that, but how will the fight against plastics benefit once this treaty is ratified by the UN?
I think it already has, because I think my colleagues who work on the plastic campaign noted that this treaty is, I think, the first international binding treaty that recognises that plastic's a problem. So in the preamble, we already note that plastic is a problem. And I think from a legal perspective, that's helpful that it can do that, and hopefully that will sort of pave the way for the plastic treaty that's being negotiated at the moment. Some of the other things that it can do when it comes to plastics could be around looking at resolving techno fixes that actually do more harm than good. So if we think about the open ocean cleanup processes, the environmental impact assessment regime within the treaty could make sure that these are done in a way that don't actually cause more problems for biodiversity than they actually have by trying to sort of fix it in a way that's perhaps a little bit ignorant of some of the biodiversity that's out there in these plastic gyres.
Minute, I can give you all of 30 seconds. Tell me why the UN is under the gun to approve this quickly, and what do you think the initial results are going to be?
Well, I mean, thank you very much for that. But I think that, you know, we already said that the high seas is 2/3 of the ocean. It's like 45% of this planet. So we have no time to lose. I think everybody who came in there did not potentially come out all happy, but that is really the sense that of global multilateralism. So I think everybody wanted to see this treaty. And as such, I think that we should really focus on making sure that this enter into force as soon as possible, because we need this to protect our ocean.
Wonderful. Minna, Peter, Julian, Mohammed, I would like to thank you all. It's been a great conversation. And that does it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Sean Caleb's here in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching, everyone.